He is the publisher of the Morgan Report on Precious Metals, author of Get the Skinny on Silver Investing, and featured speaker at investment conferences in North America, Europe, and Asia. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome David Morgan. David.
So, do we have to be out of here at 5, Robert?
We'll run a little over, but
okay.
I just want to keep things moving.
All right. Outline of a revolution. When you have a government that operates without limits, which proclaims the right to arrest, torture, and kill anyone, anywhere, with no warrants, no trial, or no due process. When you have a government that militarizes the police and grants the armed forces the power to operate with impunity within their own borders and beyond, a government that views you, the people, as the enemy and treats you as such. When you have a government that lies to take you into wars of aggression, toppling country after country, killing countless innocent civilians, when you have all of the rights, when you have this right in front of you, so blatant, so clear, with president after president towing the line of the same agenda, you shouldn't have to be convinced that both parties in this political puppet show are owned and operated by the same interest. And for the record, President Obama and those preceding him are middle management. And if you see where we're headed, you shouldn't have to be convinced that the system that you are living in must be brought to a halt. The purpose of this presentation is primarily an instruction manual for a peaceful, I put that in quotation marks, revolution. Let's hope so. Most of this was inspired by a website entitled Storm Clouds Gathering. There are those who will be taken aback when you start using the word revolution. Revolution, the act of revolting, and the overturning of the current power structure is an extreme measure and one that should be handled with extreme caution and in most cases should be avoided. Revolutions are dangerous in every sense of the word and as difficult not to, or impossible to predict their outcome. But there are times when allowing those in control to stay in control is even more dangerous. Revolutions begin with a no and end with a yes. Revolutions begin when you say no to those who claim to have power over you. And revolutions end when you accept the new status quo, a new normal, whether that new normal is an improvement or not. The causes of a revolution are numerous in form, but there's one common root, and that is discontent. Discontent is the emotion that builds and builds under the surface. It is a storm that brews in the minds of the people, and it's waiting to be unleashed. The trouble is that it's much easier to unleash that storm than it is to get people in agreement as to what should be the outcome. It's not easy to get people to see eye to eye regarding what needs to happen after the current system fails. So this is usually put off or avoided altogether, and that is a serious mistake. Without clear objectives, chaos usually sets in soon after the old regime fails, and the result of that power vacuum is that a tyrant rises to bring order. It should therefore be abundantly obvious that discontent is not a sufficient driving force for a revolution. In order for an upheaval to have positive results, it must be driven by a clear and realistic vision, a vision that accounts for the world and humans the way they actually are. There is nothing more dangerous than armed men with utopian dreams. So let's be realistic. We, the people, are divided. We are divided ourselves into classes and subclasses, liberals and conservatives, libertarians, anarchists, socialists, anarcho-socialists, mini-anarchists, state-based free market capitalists, anarcho-capitalists, and resource-based economy advocates, and the list goes on. There's absolutely no chance that any of you is going to convince all of the others that your way is the right way. Unless, of course, you are the one that rises to power and enforces that at the barrel of a gun. This is the way it usually happens throughout history. What did I do?
Nope, that was a
No. Okay. Not there yet. And this is the way it usually happens throughout history, and this is what we must avoid repeating. A movement is only successful if it starts with an idea that is strong enough to take root in the mind of the population and inspires and motivates the people to spread it. It is possible for diverse and divided people to form a coalition in times of great need and unify around an idea, but it only works if that idea meets 3 requirements. 1, it must articulate a clear and defined common interest, which allows the people to work together. The necessity of unification, even if that unification is temporary, needs to be evident to all stakeholders, and it must be accompanied by a sense of urgency. 2, a clear vision of what you're working towards. What are you going to replace the current system with? Ironing out the fine details isn't actually productive. What is needed is a broad and abstract vision based upon principles. In human societies, extreme and abrupt changes are usually destructive. All efforts must be made to retain social stability, and this means steering clear of any sort of utopian fantasies. 3, a plan of action and clear understanding of the rules of engagement. I'll refer to these 3 elements collectively as a conscious revolution. You don't have to get mystical about it. It means to think before you act. Let's start with the common interest. Establishing the common interest is easy if you are informed, and if the people around you are not informed, then your job is very clear. You must inform them. Whether you consider yourself liberal or conservative or none of the above that I read before, the bankers and corporations which hold the puppet strings of the state have placed us on a path that leads to complete and total destruction. Our common interest is the world that we are leaving to our children. The clear vision of what we are working toward is much harder. Again, there is nothing more dangerous than armed men with utopian dreams, and there is no greater symptom of utopianism than the illusion that we can convince the entire world to accept one monolithic belief system. Yet at the same time, all great movements are driven by an idea. They are driven by vision. How do we resolve this apparent contradiction? How do we find a common vision without falling for the naive fantasy that we can unify all worldviews? The answer is actually pretty simple. And it's good, because very simple ideas can be transmitted person to person without breaking down. Our vision must start with a foundational understanding that there is not one single way for humans to live on this planet. And that is unacceptable, and it is unacceptable to force others into a system without their consent or to use violence or coercion to compel them. That's common sense. And it really is, but not for a lot of people. Most people like to use government thugs to enforce their good intentions, or they just don't like it when it comes home to roost when the gun is pointed at them. When the current false system falls, there's going to be no way to reconstitute it into its old shape and size without violence and coercion. Therefore, the only real ethical option is to accept that Humpty Dumpty isn't going to be put back together again. When it's time to rebuild, we don't need to figure out one system that everybody can fit under. Rather, we need to figure out an approach which facilitates multiple systems to abide side by side. I call these SOCs, self-organizing communities. What would this look like? Well, imagine a network of small, voluntarily formed communities bound together in loose federations that cooperate for mutual defense and trade needed with decision-making taking place at the local level. It's a very simple concept, one that's been applied many times throughout history. The most striking example is the Iroquois Federation, which unified 6 tribes, each with their own cultures and traditions. The Iroquois Federation existed before the arrival of Columbus and lasted until 1779, when they were conquered by the U.S. military. Many historians believe that the Iroquois Federation served as the original inspiration for the United States. The most striking difference being that the Iroquois Federation never had a central government. Remember, D.C. is a district. You know, the states actually have all the power. That's the way it was set up, but I won't going to go down that rabbit hole. No one at the top had the power to force the member tribes to do anything whatsoever, and yet the system worked, and it worked very well for a very long time. So clearly, this is not a utopian fantasy. It's a viable option, and it's been proved through history. The final element of the conscious revolution paradigm is the plan of action. The strategy and tactics, the short-term and long-term goals, and the structure of the movement. So let's start at the top-level strategy and work toward the tactics. Some think of a revolution in terms of bullets and bombs. This is an absolute misconception. Revolutions are about pulling the pillars of power out from underneath the power structure of the state and watching it fall. The state leans on 3 primary pillars of power. The control of the group mind, therefore your ideas and beliefs that I talked about earlier. 2, the control of money, finance, and thereby most human activity. And 3rd, the monopoly on violence and the use of intimidation to extract obedience by fear. There are 3 stages of a revolution, and they are sequential and correlate directly to the 3 pillars of power. The first is an ideological revolution. This is where we undermine the belief systems that support their control. This is where we systematically erode their illusion of legitimacy, the aura of power. We expose these criminals and for the scoundrels that they are, and we inspire discontent among those who the state depends on for its functioning. If you're new to this, welcome to the party. It's already in full swing, and guess what? We have areas where we are winning. Most in this room would certainly be aware of Zbigniew Brzezinski, and in recent decades, he had this to say. The resulting widespread use in worldwide populist activism, thank you, Jeff, is proving inimical to the external domination of the kind that prevailed in the age of colonialism and imperialism. Persistent and highly motivated populist resistance of politically awakened and historically resentful peoples to external control has been proven to be increasingly difficult to suppress. So in my words, the internet's winning, education is winning, people are waking up. The second phase of the revolution is a strategic noncompliance. Strategic noncompliance, or more accurately, defiance. This can take many forms and multiple approaches and can be used at the same time. The goal of strategic noncompliance is to interrupt the chain of obedience for as long as possible, as many times as possible, to publicize that interruption on as large a scale as possible, and to document the police and/or military brutality that follows and distribute that footage far and wide. The purpose of this is to damage the ruling party's image because power is all about image. It's smoke and mirrors. Once that image starts to break down, this inspires others to disobey monkey see, monkey do, and when this catches on, the contagion gets set in and it becomes a force of nature. It's all about reaching critical mass. What's crucial to understand here is that revolutions are almost entirely psychological in nature. In this context, building confidence is the most important element. Therefore, it is better to do small, successful operations and build them up than it is to start with a large, high-stakes event. The third stage of the revolution comes from when the people have built the necessary momentum to take the monopoly on violence out of the hands of the current regime. In the best of circumstances, such traditions can be relatively peaceful, but this is only possible when a significant portion of the police and military have taken the side of the people. The police and military are the enforcement arm of the state, and without them, the powers that they have no meaning. Faltering governments always resort to brutal repression as an attempt to stay in power. This is often a fatal error. Even one refusal to follow an immoral order can set off a chain reaction that destroys the illusion of authority, and that is something that's extremely important to understand. Once that happens, it's game over. I'll give you an example of one person making a significant difference. In East Germany on November 7th, 1989, the Communist Party ordered the military to put a stop to the mass protests that had been going on throughout that year. The commander of the army refused, and he ordered his men to stand down. That sent a clear message that the Communist Party was no longer in control. This realization spread quickly through the population, and communism fell. Now, since this is such a crucial element in the equation, it's not something to be left up to chance. Every effort needs to be made right now. Reach out to the police and military and help them to wake up as to what's going on, and let them know that the people will support them if they break the chain of command. How many here, I'm sorry, I got to digress because he's a very good friend of mine who just passed away recently. How many in this room know Jack McLam or know of him? Just curious. Okay. I'll just digress a little further. Jack was very instrumental in putting together a tape about the sheriff's power, and I personally sent it to our sheriff's department in Spokane. These are the kind of things that you can do on an individual basis to reincorporate where the power comes from. It comes from the bottom up. I am not a top-down believer at all, although that's how they try to rule us. Our current system relies on a hierarchical chain of command, social pyramid, which allows a small handful of individuals to control everyone else. In sociology, this is referred to as a vertical collectivism. If our long-term vision is not complete, is not compatible with such a structure, it would be foolish to build a resistance movement which copies that. Ends don't justify the means. This doesn't mean there is no place for leadership. To the contrary, leadership is essential. The distinction to be made here between leaders and rulers. Leaders walk ahead of the crowd. Rulers place themselves above the crowd. What's needed is a vast network of leaders independently motivated and capable of thinking for themselves, working to organize groups both locally in the real world and online, unified not by obedience to a single leader, but by unity of an idea. Now, while this approach does present challenges logistically, it has the advantage of making it virtually impossible to destroy the organization merely by getting rid of one or two leaders. A distributed organizational structure is very resilient. So where are these leaders? Well, don't wait for them to appear. We need you to be one of those leaders. And if you don't know how to lead, learn. Dealing with crowds is a skill, one that you can refine through practice and study. Anyone who wants to learn the basic psychology of uprisings and how to work with the public should study the following books. The Crowd and the Psychology of Revolution by Gustave Le Bon, and From Dictator to Democracy by Gene Sharp. These books are available to anyone, and I think you can actually download them for free. Just for the record, these books contain politics, opinions, and prejudices that I do not endorse. Like all books, they should be read with a critical mind, questioning everything that's said. However, they do offer a great deal of insight as to how to take power out of the hands of a tyrant. Leadership takes many forms, and that can mean many things depending on the situation. However, the primary job of leaders is to inspire people to take action. I have to digress again. Where does the root word action, satisfaction, come from? Satisfaction is to satisfy action. In other words, you are satisfied as a human being, not by watching TV or playing video games. You're satisfied with the action you take. If you have purpose and meaning, remember what I said earlier when I was in the panel. You know, it's the internal things that make us what we are. You want to be enough inside that no matter what happens to the price of gold, it's not going to affect your life significantly. Okay? You don't want to be attached. It doesn't mean you don't use these things or need them or want them, but you don't want to have an attachment to them. You want sort of, and I'm not that religious, but you don't want to have that kind of a need. You want to be fulfilled from the inside out. Sorry, I digress. Now, the final element you need to start a revolution is tactics. In the realm of violence, the state has the distinctive advantage, and be foolish to engage them when they're the strongest. Instead, we should use tactics that engage them when they are the weakest. Fortunately, there is no shortage of nonviolent tactics that have proven effective in toppling dictatorships. Gene Sharp's book that I mentioned lists 198 of them. The tactics employed by each group would depend on the mission and the specific goals of the group. So moving on to a couple of organizations that we have are PANDA, which are People Against the NDAA. It's a national organization that's working to fight the NDAA. On the state and local levels, they've been having successes. What's very impressive is the founder, Daniel Johnson, I like that name here, started the organization when he was 17. Then there's Oath Keepers. Founded by Stuart Rhodes, which has been reaching out to the police and military, reminding them of their oath and preparing them psychologically to disobey when unconstitutional orders are handed down. Oath Keepers made a public stand against the NDAA, and they are gaining traction within the ranks. Others are organizing social media teams to collect, spread information. Others organize street activism, such as writing messages in chalk on sidewalks and hanging up posters or inserting small leaflets into books and magazines and various stores. Possibilities, of course, are endless. Whether you start a group on your own, join an existing group, or act as an individual will depend on you and your personality. No one can decide for you. The most important thing is to take the first step and start doing something. Take action and break the inertia of passivity. This is how you take back power, one step at a time. I trust that you've now been given enough information to start, and I want to remind everybody about the revolution. I love this when I saw it the first time, and I still do. I love the fact that love is in revolution if you spell it that way. And I'm going to move on slightly, but I do have to say this to end this for everyone, and especially for myself. That sounds selfish, perhaps it is. But in my belief system, there's really psychologically two main emotions, and that's love and fear. And they've been ruling us for fear for a long time. And let's face it, I'll be honest. I mean, I'm scared of somebody breaking down my door and pointing a gun at me. That scares the hell out of me, okay? That's when my German Shepherd's going to take them out. But love is an emotion that can, in my view, take care of almost anything. And so we want to come from a place, again, that it's taken me a long time to develop, to be honest with you. And I'm not saying I have it all the time, but I'm saying that, as I said in the speech, we want to be able to think before we act. We want to use our head and our heart together. We want to be balanced individuals, and we want to give the most important thing that we can, and that is our time, our efforts, our energy, and our love to our fellow human beings. When this thing comes down, you are going to develop things and skills and ideas and probably friendships that are unimaginable. And those are really good and powerful things. But the external world that we've enjoyed for so long, a lot of that I think is going to be far, far different. So you got to look at what's really important to you and do some thought experiments, I was asked by a man and woman, a husband and wife, they had a genius level son, had an IQ almost as high as Trey's, I think. And they took me to dinner and they wanted to pick my brain. Why, I don't know, but they did. And they asked me if I could give some advice to their son to help him develop. And I said, sure, for what it's worth, I'll tell you what. I go, the most important thing that you can do is do something that you don't want to do once a month. That's how we grow. We don't grow when we stay in our comfort level. And we all, collectively, as a human species, are going to get kicked out of our comfort zone. And for me, I see it as a mostly positive thing, not to say that I'm such an idealist that there's not going to be a lot of pain, suffering, and death. There will be. But remember, power starts from in here, spread it outward. And with that, you know that I know that I love you.